Hello everybody, just decided to give you guys a quick update on how this Panzer M4 or Benelli M4 clone is going, how it's holding up. If you're unaware of this gun or unfamiliar with it, basically this is a Turkish-made Benelli M4 clone. It is fairly close to being a one-to-one clone. It's not quite one-to-one, but it's damn near. But just to give you guys an update on how this thing has been, let's just talk about it a little bit. So, as far as some of the changes that I've made to it since I've purchased it, as you can see, we have a 7-round magazine now. This is a Dave's Metalworks tube. This thing just basically dropped right in and installed easily, but I will say to anybody who is trying to remove the factory 5-round extension or tube, it does require heat to get off. Not necessarily that hard, but if you have a heat gun or a blowtorch, it's a piece of cake. But just be advised that you will need heat to remove it, since it does have a pretty disgusting amount of Loctite under it, which we're talking about this thing right here. So yeah, it has a disgusting amount of Loctite under it, and it will require heat to break loose. But again, the Dave's Metalworks tube, this is the one-piece magazine. This thing goes on without a hitch. We have the Enforced WMLX. This is the Truckee 11-inch handguard. You do need to remove the factory snap ring sling retainer or the sling loop to install this handguard. But this handguard is an M-lock handguard, by the way. This thing actually went on fairly easily. Did require some finagling to get it to slide on and fit just right, but it wasn't terribly bad. Got a little QD sling loop or QD socket right here. This is an Ergo hand stop, FDE colored. I actually painted the receiver and the barrel, little rattle can job. Not quite OD green, but close enough. Didn't really put too much effort into that. Just wanted to get it anything other than black, honestly. But we have the GG&G charging handle right here. Drop-in piece, went on without a hitch. And in the back of the shotgun here, we have the Turkish-made M4 style collapsible stock. I actually had to order this part from New Zealand from a little outfit called Delta Mikes, I believe. They did ship it from New Zealand, and long story short with that, I was actually part of a group that got in on this. There's a pretty big thread running on these Turkish-made shotguns available on ar15.com. Long story short, though, my stock actually got held up in customs and returned back to New Zealand. So Delta Mikes actually had to reship it back a second time. Got it the second time, no problems, but it was kind of a bitch to get this. The prices have since went up on them. I'm not going to tell you how much they cost. You can just go to the website and look for yourself. They might have to be back ordered. I know they're relatively more difficult to get now versus, several months ago. But this was definitely a difference maker with this shotgun. It originally came with a fixed buttstock. It was substantially longer. This thing is collapsible. It's not made out of metal like the factory Benelli collapsible stock, but it does have this nice adjuster button right here. Locks into place very positively, very securely. It is a polymer stock, so basically the tube is polymer. This piece right here is polymer, the cheek riser is polymer, and everything else is as well. But yeah, everything back here is polymer. It actually has a QD sling socket right here, which is one reason why I really wanted to get this stock, so you can actually run a 2-point sling with this thing. But again, this stock makes a huge difference. If you are in the market for one of these shotguns, these Turkish-made Benelli M4 clones, I'm not going to go out and say definitively that these stocks will fit them, but if you have one of these variants, I'm pretty sure that this particular stock will fit any of the Turkish-made clones. Not 100%, but I'm pretty sure it will. With that said, as far as installing that stock, you do have to apply heat because the factory stock is threaded into the receiver in the rear portion here. Heat is required to remove it as well. There's a disgusting amount of Loctite back there. So just be prepared to get a heat gun, or probably wouldn't use a blowtorch on this part of the gun, but definitely consider using a heat gun to remove it if you do plan on installing one of these adjustable stocks. As far as how many positions it has, let's see what we got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 positions, I believe. So 6 or 7 positions. Anyway, it has a lot of positions. It's actually a really nice stock, and assuming you install it properly, it's nice. It's got rubber butt pad back here. It's not particularly soft. It's quite firm, actually, but versus the factory stock, it is definitely an upgrade. Now, if you watch the original video that I made of this shotgun, I did have some serious QC complaints about this thing, particularly the little scope rail, or the optic rail right here. The rear sights are canted as fuck. And the front sight was, it was a little canted too. It had some issues. However, you can resolve that. Basically, there's just this little nut right here. You can just loosen it and tighten it as needed. You can kind of wiggle the sight a little bit, adjust it. So, I mean, it is something that's fixable. It's not even that difficult to resolve, but it is something you might want to be aware of with these things. Now, as far as the rear sight, mine is honestly fucked. As you can see how it sits on the receiver, it's definitely more slanted or canted towards the right side of the receiver. It's probably pretty obvious to see. It's really bad. However, you can adjust the windage on this sight, so you can move it over if necessary. I have a pretty rough zero the way that it is with the front sight, so these sights are usable. However, due to the slant that this thing has, if you do have to adjust it on the fly, it's gonna be relatively difficult to zero, just because it's kind of moving, like whenever you adjust the windage to the left, it's kind of moving up and to the left at the same time. So you gotta fuck with it a little bit just to get it right. So because of that, I've chosen to run this red dot right here. Kind of resolves that issue. But the scope rail itself was a little canted as well. However, that was remedied because it's held into place by what I believe 4 screws on the top. As you see, those little flathead screws right there. With mine, I was actually able to go through the bottom of the receiver, assuming you take the guts out, you know, the bolt and carrier and trigger group. You can remove those screws, and I was actually able to realign the scope rail just a bit. So it was straightened. The rear sight, however, tried to do the same thing with it. And basically they actually cut the sight itself improperly. So it's kind of hard to show up on camera here, but the left leg of the sight was actually longer than the right. So even if they tapped, even if they drilled and tapped the holes in the receiver correctly, it still would have set improperly, just because this leg over here was actually longer than this leg. So the whole sight itself was just fucked. So, I mean, me being a tinkerer, I did the best that I could with it. I actually tried to grind and sand down the left side of the sight as best as I could. It straightened it up just a little bit, but it's still really fucked. So, just be aware that if you get one of these things, the sights might be kind of a problem with them, but if you're willing to run a red dot or an optic, you can kind of fix that. But again, QC, not that great. Now, as far as the part that most of you probably came here to watch this video for, how does this thing run? So, I'm going to sprinkle in some footage of that, showing how it ran before the upgrades. And then a little shooting footage of how it ran after the upgrades. Now, with that said, and assuming you've probably seen that footage here, I will say that before I made changes to this shotgun, so before we added the extended magazine, the handguard, the stock, and a few of the other things that we've done here, before we did that, it generally ran fine, okay? Now, as you probably saw from the video that I sprinkled in here, or the shooting footage that I sprinkled in here, we did have some issues primarily with failures to extract. And we had this really weird issue where we were getting some extracurricular activity with the shell stop down here. Basically, if you weren't able to see what was going on in the video, what was happening is every time this thing would feed around from the magazine, load it into the shell carrier here, and try to feed it up, an extra round would just get spit out and basically launch out the bottom here. And, you know, it would be a live round. So what I deduced was happening here is the shell stop on the inside of the receiver. Basically, let's see if I can point to it, but basically that thing right there, that is what holds the shells in the magazine, which, by the way, I actually have a enhanced follower in here, by the way, as you can see. But that actually holds the shells in the magazine. So I'm going to take a live round just so everybody knows this thing is clear. I'm just going to take a live round here. Safety's on, by the way. Or actually it's not, so let me activate that just in case. But whenever you load a shell into the shotgun, so there's this shell stop right there. There's a little piece of metal, right, it's kind of hard to see, but basically right where my fingertip is, it's up against the rim of the shot shell. And it's attached to this lever right here that is under spring tension. And the spring is basically like right there in the receiver. And there's this little roll pin that holds the entire assembly into place. Okay, so that thing is kind of a problem, and we're eventually going to replace it, but this is still the factory shell stop for the shotgun. But I'm guessing that basically the geometry of the shell stop itself is either off or the spring is weak. But long story short, it was launching an extra shell out, probably due to the increased spring tension from the extended 7-round magazine. So I'm guessing it just isn't powerful enough or isn't designed to hold all those extra shells under that spring tension into the magazine. And so basically with a little bit of inertia, it would typically happen under recoil or when the shotgun was handled. Boy, it's just, you know, every so often randomly a shell would just spit out from there. And it would either go into the shuttle here if there was nothing already in there, or, you know, during live fire, it would just launch it out the bottom, and basically it would continue to cycle. So it would load a fresh round into the chamber, and it would chamber, and it would, you know, be ready to shoot, but it was just, you know, randomly spitting live shells out of the magazine onto the ground. So we're going to remedy that by eventually replacing the shell stop entirely and replacing the spring with an aftermarket unit. However, that kind of leads to the problems that I was having here. So if you saw my original video, we're going to get this live round out of here. There we go. But if you saw my original video, basically this shotgun was just intended to be a project. It's, you know, a toy. It was just a project for me to tinker with and fuck around with, because I didn't really want to spend, you know, almost $2,000 on a real deal Benelli M4. So I just bought this to basically see if I could approximate the performance out of it and just, you know, basically have a nice little toy to tinker and fuck around with. So yeah, with that said, again, the shotgun originally cost like $549, right? So with the upgrades, you're still spending a shit ton less than you would a real Benelli M4. And, you know, with your extended magazine, the handguard, and all of the little various other doodads that I dropped on this thing, I'm probably still well under $1,000 totally invested in the shotgun, okay? So that is a good thing. However, you can't always put lipstick on a pig or polish a turd. Now, I'm not going to call this thing a complete piece of shit, but I will say that I would highly, highly suggest you temper your expectations with these things. I honestly have not found it to be 100% reliable. However, I will say that if you're willing to perform some aftermarket upgrades and replace a few parts here and there, either with Benelli OEM components or, you know, aftermarket components, you can basically turn this into a reliable shotgun. And, you know, you can, I mean, you can kind of look at this as like a parts kit gun if you're willing to, again, you know, change your expectations with this thing. But under no circumstances, or, you know, I don't want to leave, you know, any expectations that this thing is just as good as a Benelli M4, because it's not. It absolutely isn't. It's got some serious quality control issues and some just weird shit going on with it that, I mean, I would not recommend this shotgun unless you are willing to spend a little bit of extra money to make some tweaks and changes to it. And then even then, you know, you might have little weird gremlins pop up that you just kind of want to handle appropriately as they, you know, appear. If you're willing to go that route, you'll have you a nice, fun little shotgun that you can fuck around with at the range. You can probably hunt just fine with it. I don't know if I would use this as a home defense gun or stake my life on it, but I will say that, again, before I started installing some of these aftermarket parts on it, it had a break-in period that I don't believe I mentioned before, except for in my previous video. But with that, basically the first 50 rounds, I had all kinds of malfunctions. After 50 rounds, it actually started running flawlessly. So yeah, definitely temper your expectations there. Just, be willing to expect a reasonable break-in period, maybe 50 to 100 shells before I would say, issues completely go away. But after that break-in has been performed, the shotgun ran great. So after that, I, started changing parts out, and only after I changed those parts out did issues begin to reappear again. I would probably wager that most of my issues specifically are based on the extended magazine. So if you do run an extended magazine, there's two upgrades that I would highly suggest you consider. For one, replace the extractor with an OEM Benelli extractor. That will pretty much solve your extraction issues 100%, and it'll make the shotgun infinitely more reliable. The only other thing that I would highly suggest replacing is the shell stock. So replace that with a GG&G or any other aftermarket unit that you prefer, or even a Benelli OEM unit, and that should correct that weird ass double feed issue that I was having. And this is again just a sample of one. I don't know if any of you other guys that might have already had these are experiencing that issue, but considering the unique mixture of parts that we have here, that might just be unique to this particular shotgun. It might not, I don't know. But considering that's an issue that I'm dealing with, and I'm reasonably confident that's how I would resolve it, that's what we're going to do in the future here. But at least going forward, I would say that if you are to get one of these shotguns, definitely expect to change a few things out. Definitely expect to upgrade a few things over the period of time that you own this thing. Otherwise, I would probably relegate it, as a range toy. It definitely puts a smile on your face when shooting it. And I would say without a doubt, this collapsible stock right here makes a huge fucking difference in as far as how comfortable this shotgun is to shoot, and just running it makes a huge difference. So if you're willing to invest in one of these, definitely do it. Makes a big difference right there. The handguard itself also is a bit of a difference maker, at least for me it was. Now with these 11-inch trucky handguards, there is a little bit of play, as you can see. So this is properly installed, but that's just kind of normal with these things. About a millimeter or so, I would say, of play. It's not terrible, but if that sort of shit bothers you, then you probably won't want to deal with this. However, the extended real estate that you have for your hand here, coupled with the fact that I can run my light pretty easily just like that, and I actually have a QD mount for a sling, and the hand stop, of course, that made a big difference for me. So this shit right here is just something that I deal with. I don't mind it. Some of you guys might not care for that too much. Other than that, it's a fun toy. It's definitely a fun toy. Some of you guys might not like the idea of dropping a G or roughly $1,000 or so in a shotgun like this that may or may not ultimately be 100% reliable. However, this is just something that I chose to do because I wanted to. So I hope you can understand that. This is no substitute for my actual home defense shotguns, by the way. I actually have a Vepr 12 that I've had for damn near a decade now, and I love that thing to death. And I have a Remington 870 police variant, which is my primary go-to shotgun, for home defense and shit like that. This thing, again, it's just kind of a glorified experiment more than anything, which I have enjoyed. Don't get me wrong, I have enjoyed it, but I got a few things to do, just mainly with the shell stop here before I will probably dump another 100 shells through it and test reliability at that point. But other than that, we've got probably close to 500 shells through this thing now. All right, so let's talk about long-term parts wear. So this is the Panzer M4 bolt carrier group. This is the tail, carrier, bolt, and extractor. Just figured I'd show you what it looks like after, probably well over 400 shot shells at this point. I honestly lost count. I know we're over 400, but this is basically what it's looking like. So as you can see, the bolt face looks fine. As far as the lugs, no abnormal peening, no abnormal wear. Cam pin looks fine. a slight amount of finish wear on there, but other than that, works fine. The spring, fine, obviously. What you're seeing is mostly just dirt and oil. It's not completely cleaned, but as far as the carrier, where the gas pistons impact the carrier, there's two pistons on this thing. One impacts right there on that little wear mark where my fingertip is, the other on the other side. As you can see, those have not peened, they have not mushroomed, they have not deformed. The carrier still looks perfectly fine. Just slight finish wear more than anything, but nothing that looks abnormal. The other side of the bolt also looks fine. Wipe away some of that dirt and oil, you'll see actually very minimal wear on the metal. Alright, just showing you a bit more here. This is the actual trigger group of the Panzer M4. Just showing you a close-up of the components here. That's the hammer, disconnector. The trigger specifically is very rough. It's actually got some pretty sharp edges. Maybe it's actually coming across here on camera. But the edges where you rest your finger of the trigger, they're quite sharp. And if you shoot this thing for an extended period of time without gloves, it will cause blisters on your finger. It's actually quite uncomfortable after extended shooting sessions. But other than that, you know, if you wear gloves, it's a non-issue, but just something to be aware of. The safety is actually quite stiff. It's extremely stiff. It's got the triangular safety, you know, Benelli style or whatever. You really have to push the shit out of it to actuate it. It is not easy to actuate whatsoever. But other than that, the shotgun performs pretty well for the most part. If you just buy this thing and you leave it stock and you don't plan on changing anything out, it'll probably work pretty well. As far as the types of shells that we ran, I ran probably close to 200 of these through it. These are Monarch. These are found at Academy. These are actually full powered shells. They're 1350 feet per second. These are 6s, by the way. I ran a collection, or a combination of 6, 7s, and 8s through this thing, mostly Monarch. But we did run some Estate. We ran some Remington, the green box, the nitro shit. I forget what weight it was. It was probably 7s or 8s, I believe. We also ran some buckshot, some Wolf, 9 pellet buck. You know, the shit with clear hull and the crimped casings. And what else did we run? A lot of Estate. Yeah, we ran some Estate, bird and buck. That shit worked pretty well for the most part. I think most of the failures that it had probably honestly weren't even a fault of the shotgun. A lot of it might have just been due to the variances in the shells and potentially, you know, just poor QC on those. Because we were mostly running cheap shit. I'm just gonna tell you the truth there. It definitely performs better with buckshot because the extra power and the loads definitely help it cycle better. But for the most part, again, it ran pretty well. Outside of the few occasional hiccups from the double feeds and shit like that, it didn't really consistently have any failures to extract. We did have a few random failures here and there, but again, once you upgrade to that Benelli extractor, that pretty much fixes all of that. So all in all, again, it's a toy. It's definitely a toy, but it's been a fun toy. I will definitely say that. The upgrades have completely transformed it for the better, I would say. Once we get this shell stop issue sorted out, I'm reasonably confident in believing that this shotgun will be probably 95 to 99% reliable at that point. The knockoff Argo gas system in this thing pretty much works as advertised. Short stroke piston or whatever, and it generally runs pretty clean. It didn't require much cleaning even when I did need to clean it, and other than that, it's been fun to shoot. So again, I will say, if you're interested in these, just temper your expectations accordingly. But outside of that, expect to make some changes, expect to potentially experience some QC issues here and there. If you can deal with that shit, more power to you, but just understand that this will probably never be something that will replace, you know, the real Benelli M4s. It's probably something that will never replace your Vepers. I would never put it on the same pedestal with those guns. So again, understand that and act accordingly. And outside of that, you know, if you have any questions or want to comment on the video, be my guest. If you want to share your experiences that you've had with yours, be my guest. I'm definitely all ears. I would love to hear how these things are treating you guys if you just happen to have one as well. Outside of that, have a great rest of your day and enjoy the video, and I'm glad you stopped by. Have a good one.